podcast devoted to the study of Hegel's philosophy of right.
Property and contract are initially analyzed by Hegel neither as an economic ordering of society nor as a positive legal institution, but one would have to say that they are the fundamental principles of the legal order as they can be considered from the perspective of natural law. Hegel does discuss positive law data, but the angle he uses is formally different. Property law is a necessary implication of the principle of the person. Thus, the issue here is not about the equitable distribution of property, but even more fundamentally, the principle of property law as such. Property, according to Hegel, is not an accidental historical form, but it is the necessary form in which the selfhood of the person becomes real and objective. The transition from abstract legal personality to property is given in the preceding paragraphs. Law is the existence of freedom. It is freedom as an idea. The freedom of the person is not only an inner quality of the subject, nor is it a formal and abstract principle, but it is affirmed in reality. There is an objectification of the person. The implications of the concept of person are at issue here. The person is an abstract commitment to himself. He stands in opposition to pure nature. The person, precisely insofar as it is involved in itself, is distinct from things. After all, things are not involved in themselves. Free will as a person is something subjective that stands in opposition to a given that is not self-set objectivity. Personhood thus contradicts its being. In personhood, the moment of the generality of the will prevails. But this generality contradicts a position in which the will would be purely subjective. So that is a limitation in which a contradiction appears. So the person actively wants to remove this limitation, namely, to be merely subjective. He wants to obtain for himself reality and objectivity. What the subject does is to set his own nature and that which he finds in the environment now as his own. He takes possession of an object, and thus the pure subjectivity of the will is ended. By taking possession of an object, the person takes possession of something which is not a person and makes that object his property. And thereby he gives to his selfhood a first form of objective existence. Taking possession of what is not personal is the confirmation of my personhood in a non-subjective and non-internal way. My subjective existence now becomes visible in its relation to an object. In property, the person comes to a first objectification of freedom. It is only the first objectification. Here, the person's freedom is still only immediate. This freedom is not the result of a mediation between generality and particularity, nor is it the result of a mediation between many legal entities. Objectification in property is characterized by immediacy, for it lies only in the sphere of that which is immediately distinguished from the person, the non-personal as we find it, things or more formally, that which is not involved in itself. The thing on which the person exercises his right of appropriation has only the characteristic that it is immediately distinct from the person, that is, it is external. Hegel understands these external things not only as natural objects, such as animals, but also as cultural goods. But with cultural goods, we immediately face a problem. Cultural goods are not simply things that are external to the person. After all, they are the result of a mediation with the will. They are products of human intelligence and labor. Only through the will can cultural goods become objects of property. We can degrade them, that is, make them into a thing. Cultural goods, that is, things produced by human beings, are made into things, into possible possessions by this further activity of the mind. The transition from property to contract is directly connected with this issue. Next, it is important to say that property is not an economic category. It is only the first form in which the person expresses his selfhood. In ownership, the person places his will in a thing. This thing thereby becomes his own. The apparent selfhood of the thing is thereby negated, effectively denied, and thus it is demonstrated that things are not involved in themselves as the person is. In property, it is shown that things are not substantial. They are only ideal, that is, relative to the will. The will is the reality and truth of things. Things do not exist for themselves, but they exist for the freedom expressed in those things. The reasonable character of property does not mean primarily that things are used as means to satisfy needs. The reasonable character of property lies in the fact that the person thereby gives himself an objective existence.